A few months back, we reviewed the prototype Shift. Now, we get to look at the real thing. Hey everybody, it's Luca from Rackets Runners. Now, for some of you regular viewers who have been with us since the beginning of the year, you'll know that when I first playtested the prototype Shift, I rated it quite highly. Fast forward a couple of months and we got to take the final version out to the court, compare it to the prototype, see what changes Wilson made, and see whether it's as good as I remembered. Now, I just wanted to remind everybody before we go on that any of the products we discuss on this channel you can also check out on our website, racketsandrunners.ca. And please remember to like the video, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, and let me know down in the comment section down below what topics you want me to discuss in the coming weeks. I love the community we've built on this channel. It truly is the most fulfilling project I've ever taken on, and I'm so excited to keep going. Also, if you want to follow me on Instagram, my handle is @LucaVB_. I'm going to start posting some more behind the scenes type stuff on the products I'm testing for that week, and maybe some first impressions, I'm not entirely sure. We've also got the store Instagram @RacketsRunners. But anyways, back to the Shift. Now, I have to say I was very excited for this release. As a lot of you know, I was really close to switching to the prototype when I tried it the first time, but I was kind of waiting for the general release to come out so I could put it through the ringer again. I was also pretty worried because this Shift was just a prototype and I didn't want too much to change, and the good news is not much has. Now, we are just looking at the 300 gram Shift today, which you guessed it is still 300 grams. It has the same 99 square inch head size, 23 millimeter beam, and 16 by 20 string pattern. Back then I called this the Shift 300, but it's actually the Shift 99. I probably should have known that. So what exactly has changed? Well, first things first, the quality control is much better, which I guess is a good thing. To be honest, it's pretty bad that Wilson was charging the price they were for the prototype, considering some of the quality control issues that those frames had. I'm all for letting your clientele in on the ground floor of product development, but if you're going to charge $300 to let us do that, you better make sure your frames are up to scratch. But let's move on to some actual major changes, shall we? Starting with the paint job. As you can see, they are drastically different. You've got orange accents and writing all over the final release instead of just in the one place on the prototype. And the one big major change here is the size of the Shift logo on the final release. As you can see, it's much smaller than on the prototype. Yeah, they look pretty much identical. To be honest, even beyond the paint job, very little has changed, but there are two important spec differences. For one, they raised the stock target swing weight. I mentioned that they should do this, and it seems like Wilson listened because they raised it about 12 points. The final release here swung at 315 strong. The other major difference isn't so easy to see to the untrained eye. In fact, you pretty much need Wilson's brand new Biardo Tune Pro to test for it, but it's a huge feature on the Shift, and it's called vertical bending. We all know about horizontal bending, but most of us just know it as a Rackets flex this way. Vertical bending is also a Rackets flex, but it's on the vertical axis this way. Obviously, Rackets have always had some sort of vertical bending characteristic, but we've never really given that spec much importance or even tested for it before. That's what's special about the Shift. Wilson have played with the Rackets vertical flex in an attempt to amplify its spin potential. I'm also going to get rid of the prototype now. Wait, was that the prototype? I can't even tell. Now, it's no coincidence that Wilson released a machine that can test for vertical bending around the same time they release a racket where that spec is extremely important. With the prototype, there were rumors about the actual tech going on inside this racket, but one thing was for sure, when you hit a modern spinny ground stroke, you could almost feel the extra snapback going on inside the frame. It turns out that sensation came from the Shift's vertical bending being extremely low. 65 RA to be exact. We tested it compared to a bunch of other frames on the wall, and it consistently came in at least 10 points under most other rackets. So it was low on the prototype, but it seems that Wilson decided to tone it back a little bit for the final release and stiffened up that vertical bending to 68 RA strung. It's definitely not as extreme, and I felt that on court, but it still very much so works. It's a racket that has really high spin potential, up there with the Aero, the Extreme, and the V-Core, and yet it doesn't have the same artificially spinny feel that some of those frames have. That artificial feel I get especially from rackets that have really open spin grommets, because it almost feels like you're playing with a looser tension to get that extra snapback, but you lose solidity to get it. With the Shift, it still feels like you're hitting against something solid, but the snapback is still very much so there. I am a massive fan of this sensation, especially when hitting spinny ground strokes. It's crazy how much you can actually feel the graphite snapping in and out of position, basically propelling the ball out with undeniably more spin. It also helps that the shape is quite aerodynamically optimized here, especially in the throat. It's nothing crazy like on the Extreme or the Aero, but more so like the Speed, which is still a fast racket, just nothing crazy aerodynamic. The Shift definitely wants to be swung parallel to the ground, and it'll accelerate through contact quicker that way, but it's not like it needs to be swung that way the way the Aero does. Now, one of the things I said in my Shift prototype review is that the feel was excellent on that racket, and I maintain that with the final release to a certain extent. Here's what happens when you hit ground strokes with the Shift. If you hit a proper topspin ground stroke, that sensation of the graphite snapping in and out of position becomes extremely addictive. You start wanting to feel that positive response every time you hit a ground stroke, and that's why I said the feel was so good. I don't love the feel on flat shots though. You really only tap into that vertical bending sensation when you're hitting with spin, and when you're hitting flat, the racket definitely feels a little muted and jarring. Muted because I think Wilson intentionally over dampened it to reduce the risk of discomfort with that higher RA, but jarring because, at least in stock form, it's a little bit unstable. In my prototype review, I asked Wilson to increase the stock static and swing weight, and they listened to half of that by increasing the swing weight, but they kept the static weight the same. It can definitely do with a bit of weight in the handle to boost that stability, but even some lead at 3 and 9 will help expand that pretty small sweet spot and make it less jarring when you don't make perfect contact. As you guys probably know, I like to add a leather grip to most of my rackets, and when I added it to the Shift, it definitely helped boost that stability and made the feel a little bit better. I also experimented with about 3 grams of lead at 3 and 9. It still had a fairly muted response when I wasn't engaging that vertical bending, and that's never really gonna go away. But in general, with the lead, the sweet spot felt more plush, less jarring, and the racket had an overall more solid feel. When a racket lacks stability and has a muted feel, especially on flat shots, it's not going to have the best directional control out there. For your putaways, volleys, and touch shots, there are better rackets. When you combine the thick beam with the high flex as well as the fairly high launch angle that's on the Shift, it definitely has a bit of a wild side when you are going for high accuracy shots, but it's not all doom and gloom for control. Because it does have a really small sweet spot and the feel is excellent when you're hitting spinny groundies, I have to say it was really easy for me to get dialed into this racket from behind the baseline. It's kind of like a pure arrow in that regard, where it's not ideal for classic control, but for that modern style of topspin control, it's excellent, and I would say even better than most other spin rackets, because the sweet spot is so small and precise and so rewarding when you hit it well. The Shift really is a true spin racket at heart, despite maybe not looking like one, but each one of its characteristics just gets significantly better when you crank up those RPMs. It would be easy for me to say the feel and control are lacking, because in the traditional sense they kind of are, but as long as you're hitting with spin, they really aren't. Okay, I've used this term power generating potential quite a few times now, so let me explain what I mean by it. Power generating potential is a frame's inherent ability to generate pace and depth regardless of the player swinging it. You can hit powerful shots with a racket that doesn't have high power generating potential. You're just going to have to do most of the work yourself. Look at Francisco Cerundolo, for example. He hits a crazy powerful forehand, but I can guarantee you that has nothing to do with his prestige or his PT57A or whatever it is he's using, and everything to do with his technique. The Shift does have very high power generating potential. It has a stiff flex, a thick beam, and a fairly open string bed, but you do have to make good contact, otherwise the ball definitely can go flying. It's powerful, but not like a pure drive where most of the string bed is forgiving and you'll get easy access to depth and fairly precise depth even if you do make contact outside the sweet spot. Make contact outside the sweet spot here and the ball is going somewhere, just probably not in. When you do make proper contact though, my word, you can absolutely get a hold of the ball. I really appreciated this extra pop on my first serve, especially after I added the lead. If you've got a more flat style and rely on a racket's flex and precision for control, the Shift isn't going to feel great. And if you're a beginner or even lower intermediate player still kind of learning proper technique, you're going to have a tough time controlling it. The Shift really is an advanced modern player's racket. Its negative characteristics only really come out when you misuse it or hit with improper technique. For those advanced players who are going to take the time to adjust to it, it provides uniquely addictive sensation, it has plenty of power and spin, and it even has good control when you are using it right. It really is one of the most well-rounded rackets I've tried in a while. I do recommend a bit of extra weight in the handle and the hoop. Because it's made for bigger hitters, you'll want that extra bit of solidity that comes with the extra mass. Now I know some of you are wondering if I'm going to shift to the Shift, because I've been talking about how it's on my short list for racket switches for a very long time now, and the short answer is, I really don't know. That's helpful. I do want to give the Pro a shot to see if I'll like that extra solidity on flatter shots that comes with the tighter string bed, but I am kind of going through a crisis right now as to whether I want to go all in with this racket's modern characteristics or keep some of the more classic playability characteristics of something like the Gravity Pro. Two very different rackets, by the way. So yeah, whether I'm shifting or not remains pretty much ambiguous. At this rate, I'm probably never going to switch to a racket, but I am probably going to talk about my racket journey in a video in the future. That is going to be it from us for now though. Thank you so much for watching, and remember that if you do want to demo the Shift, you can come visit us in store, or you can check it out online at racketsandrunners.ca.